Chair.
Thank you, Lasky Herlock. And Minister, again, I want to welcome you into the House today, and it's great to see you. And I particularly want to thank all of my Civil Engagement Group colleagues for their support with this motion. I want to highlight the work of Senator Lynn Ruane in particular. She's not here this evening. She's currently in Vienna at the OSCE, getting politicians from across Europe to support an immediate ceasefire, and she's doing phenomenal work on that. Minister, Gaza, as everybody knows, is a graveyard for children at this point. It's a description given by the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. 4.5 months into the latest assault on the citizens of Gaza, I keep asking myself, how has this been allowed to happen? I really cannot get my head around it, and I can't comprehend the scale of this horror. We can compile the facts and figures as we have done for this motion, but it really is impossible to reckon with the misery and the fear and the grief and the hunger and the agony and the humiliation that lies behind those figures. It's suffering and it's an unimaginable scale. And I can't stop thinking about the thousands of children left without any surviving relatives. I can't stop thinking about the parents digging the bodies of their dead children out of the ruins of their family homes. Entire families are being wiped out, multiple generations murdered in an instant by 2,000-pound bombs. It's just beyond belief. Israeli bombing has levelled entire Gaza neighbourhoods. Most of the Gaza's buildings have been damaged. Mosques, ambulances and bakeries have been targeted. Hospitals are ceasing to function due to bombardment, invasion by Israeli soldiers and a lack of fuel. Bodies are piling up that can't be buried. People are having to endure surgical procedures without anaesthetic. Israel has destroyed every university in Gaza, and I think it's important to highlight all of these really horrific issues. Leading academics, artists and journalists are being murdered at an even higher rate than other Gazans. Israel is conducting an assassination campaign designed to unravel the fabric of Palestinian civil society in Gaza, and they want to destroy the history and the culture of a refugee population and have resisted their displacement, occupation, besiegement and bombardment for decades. And the ultimate goal of this assault, I believe, is to ethnically cleansing of the Gaza Strip. Israel has always sought to claim the maximum amount of Palestinian land with the fewest number of Palestinians living in it. And they've achieved this historically through massive, indiscriminate violence. All of this horror is being broadcast on our television screens and social media feeds, and it's the first genocide of the digital age. People can see what's being inflicted on the Palestinians and they are horrified. All over the world, millions of people are taking part in a global movement demanding a ceasefire. And unfortunately, as demonstrated by the US vetoing a ceasefire solution at the UN Security Council once again, their pleas, this is what's really devastating, are falling on deaf ears. Yesterday in this House, there were statements on the situation in the Middle East, and I was really happy and glad to hear powerful condemnations of Israeli war crimes from all of the speakers. It made me proud to be a member of this House, and it made me proud to be Irish. In Ireland, we treat Palestinians as human beings, we value their lives and we mourn their deaths, and that's just basic humanity. Unfortunately, it's in short supply amongst the political leadership of many Western countries, and whenever I'm in this chamber, I do think about the British, American, Canadian and German politicians who are being defamed and vilified for standing up for the humanity of Palestinians. And I think about the activists in these countries who are subject to arrest, censorship, harassment and violence. And in this country we have freedom to speak out, which means it is our duty to speak out. However, even the finest speech rings hollow if there's no action to back it up. We cannot allow ourselves to feel complacent or smug, and it's not good enough to be more tolerant and civilised at the UK or the US. These countries are actively complicit in the unfolding genocide in Gaza. They provide weapons, they aid and diplomatic cover to a rogue apartheid state. And as a former colony which fought for its freedom, and as a country dedicated to upholding the principles of human rights and international law, we must have higher standards for ourselves. We must be consistent and courageous, and we need to take real tangible action to support our Palestinian brothers and sisters during their time of need. The people of Ireland have met this challenge People are protesting in huge numbers all over the country. They are raising awareness and funds. They are contacting their public representatives, demanding action. They are making art and flying the Palestinian flag. Irish people know what solidarity looks like, and their demonstration of love and support for the people of Palestine is truly beautiful, I have to say, and it's inspiring. Local authorities all over this country are passing solidarity motions with Palestine. Many of these motions include support for the enactment of the Occupied Territories Bill and have received support from councillors from all parties and none. Our local democracy has been reflecting the will of the people, and now it's time for us to do the same. The international community is united behind a two-state solution, but Israel has done everything in its power to make that outcome impossible. It refuses to recognise the legitimacy of the ICJ, which is currently ruling on the legality of its 56-year-long occupation. Israel has expanded illegal settlement constructions since the Oslo Accords, making daily life in the West Bank impossible for indigenous Palestinians. There are 4 times more settlers in the West Bank now than there were before Oslo. The prospect of a Palestinian state, the only hope for lasting peace, is being eroded before our eyes, and unfortunately nothing is being done about it. Now, I have to say, I believe that the US-EU plans for sanctioning individual violent settlers won't make a meaningful impact, and I am concerned about that, I have to say. Violent illegal settlement is a state-backed enterprise, one which they fully intend to impose on an ethnically cleansed Gaza if they have their way. Only a full ban on settlement trade will have an impact. So we need to pass the Occupied Territories Bill and the Illegal Israeli Settlement Divestment Bill. If we fail to take concrete political action, all of our diplomatic and humanitarian work will amount to nothing. Ireland has played a hugely important, positive role countering the anti-Palestinian racism that has marred European politics in recent months. We have defended humanitarian aid, and well done to both the Taoiseach and to the Taoiseach on this area. We've called for an immediate ceasefire early and often, and the joint Spanish-Irish letter calling for a review of the EU-Israel agreement is a very, very positive step. We must go further, though, Minister, and call for the immediate Article 82 suspension of the agreement. The human rights conditions of the agreement are non-negotiable, and they have been totally disregarded by Israel. They must be made to experience consequences on the EU's democratic and liberal principles will be irreparably damaged. What we do now in response to Israel's genocide will be recorded in history. The generations who come after us will ask us if we rose to the occasion. We need to be brave. We need to be principled. If we act, others will follow. And I firmly believe that. The Palestinians struggling for freedom and for survival have asked us to impose diplomatic and economic sanctions on Israel. We did it with Russia. We did it to apartheid South Africa before that. And it's now time to take tangible action for Palestine. So let's stand now on the right side of history.
Senator Higgins.
Thank you, Minister. Amidst what we've been watching over the last period of time, the brutal bombardment, the unconscionable blockade, including the blockade of life-saving medical supplies, humanitarian supplies and water. We're also seeing the systemic attempt to dismantle a society, a culture and a people. The destruction of civilian infrastructure, the targeting of hospitals. As my colleague said, the explosion, direct demolition explosion of universities, including the museums within those universities. This is not anything like a war or a defensive action. It is a systemic destruction of a people and of their land and of their community and their culture. And it is something that within that, to see that we have such systemic policies, and they are policies, that's why individual sanctions against individual settlers are so meaningful, because these are the policies that are being pursued by the Israeli government in respect of their actions in Gaza. We're also seeing almost a culture of cruelty that it seems to be occurring within that. The individual cruelty that it takes for somebody to authorise a sniper to shoot medics who come to rescue a 6-year-old girl. Those kind of individual cruelties and a culture of cruelty that is built when you have a state which is acting with complete impunity, and where sadly the political leaders in Israel are sending a signal that is very dehumanising to about the Palestinian people. Amidst all of these horrors that we're seeing each day, we're also seeing acts of love that I've spoken about before, and acts of bravery. And bravery is not, sometimes when you hear it, bravery is not about, the person who goes out in the flak jacket or the soldier on the moves. Bravery is the act of a doctor who is operating under fire through smoke in their hospital. It is a child who goes out knowing that their friends have been killed and queues for water for their family. Bravery is a mother who takes her child from city to town to city to on the road again, to a roadside, to a shelter, to a possible bunker, and sees each place of safety destroyed but keeps priving. And bravery is those who talk about still believing in a two-state solution, in meaningful international law, in the principles of justice. It is those who come and speak to us and appeal to us in the world and say, we still believe and we dream of and demand a better future. And given the bravery that is being shown and that we are seeing from people on drops of water a day, on scraps of meal, surrounded by grief of others and carrying grief themselves, in the dust and water and danger of refugee camps that are overcrowded, given their bravery to keep going each day and to support each other, I think it's fair that Ireland would be a little braver too. And I want to acknowledge that the Irish government, as was said, have been clear on ceasefire, and let's be clear, because they don't seem to be very clear in the European Parliament. That's immediate ceasefire. Not a ceasefire, when everything's done and dusted. And not humanitarian aid, by the way, when everybody's already dead. It's about ceasefire now. And the Irish government has been clear on that. And the Irish government have also given leadership in respect of UNRWA and the UNRWA funding. And that's really important, because why we see people all around the world standing up and taking action is they know that what's in stake, what's crammed right now into Rafah, to a tiny area, the 1.5, it's not just the hearts and souls of the Palestinians, precious hearts that we don't want to see stopped. It's also the heart and soul of our international legal system, the heart and soul of the whole structure we put in place collectively as humanity after the horrors of World War II, where we said, we will now have a politics of principle. We believe all humans should be treated equally. We don't believe that it's about big powers of might and client states anymore, and might is right. They are also under attack, because we need to be clear, some of the actions being taken have been attacks on the UN itself, including, of course, the direct killing of a number of UN staff within Gaza. I come to my last 2 minutes to talk about how can Ireland be braver? Well, one way Ireland can be braver is by following through on the Occupied Territories Bill. The Occupied Territories Bill was in the manifestos of both Fianna Fáil and the Green Party coming into this last election. The Occupied Territories Bill has international legal advice from the highest level that makes it very clear this is entirely compatible with European law, because in fact, not having it is illegal effectively, in that we should not be trading with illegally occupied land, and crucially, you can't have a trade agreement that allows for trading with illegally occupied land. So there's a direct legal action that would send a signal, and failing to do it, by the way, gave and contributed to the culture of impunity that has clearly built up in Israel over the last decade. On the association agreement, yesterday the Minister said he was looking forward to the Commission's response. The Commission have responded. They've said this is political, because Article 82 of the EU-Israel Association Agreement directly allows one party, and that is the 27 member states, to suspend. What would that do if you think of the huge volume of trade between EU and Israel? That would send a signal that might save lives in Rafah, if that was on the cards and if that was spoken about. That's a meaningful action, and it can be taken immediately. It doesn't need the Commission to do a review first. It's an early action that can be taken. And then on weapons, and I want to signal that we will be bringing legislation on this too. We need to make sure there is no exemption given to any flight that passes through Ireland that may be carrying weapons designed to take lives in Gaza. And right now, there are exemptions to flights. We need to make sure no exemptions on flights which may be breaching international law and indeed the International Court of Justice in the clear signal it sent to the world on our collective responsibilities in ensuring, again, this is to the world, in protecting against genocide. I look forward to your response, Minister. There are other actions that can be taken. We have a list of them. We'll keep thinking of new actions. And everyone who can think of any action on any side of this House, all we can do, everything we can do, as soon as we can do it, that is the responsibility on all of us. South Africa has given a lead. We can join them in the ICJ case, but also in a wider set of actions. Ireland can lead, it should lead, and it must lead on this. Thank you.
Senator Lisa Chambers.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to my Civil Engagement Group colleagues for using their private members' time to debate such an important issue. And obviously we had statements yesterday as well, and I know many colleagues contributed to the topic yesterday and made their views known. Fianna Fáil welcomes this debate today. I think it's important that we here in the Seanad, with our ministers, continue to make sure that this issue is top of the agenda. And it's very rare that an international issue, an international foreign affairs issue, grasps the hearts and minds of the Irish people. It doesn't happen too often, but this is one of them. And I think the message has been received loud and clear from all of those that emailed us, because it's today's motion, but all of those citizens that have been in contact since October 7th, and even before that. This isn't a new issue, but I think it became, I suppose it entered a different phase, if I can put it that way, following October 7th. And we've been engaging, I think, a lot with people across the country ever since then, and what's been happening in Palestine and to the Palestinian people, particularly in Gaza. I want to acknowledge that I think it's been, and it's been fairly, I think, acknowledged by opposition members that Ireland has been, was very quick to call for an immediate ceasefire. No equivocation, there was no grey areas, it was a ceasefire now, and we have continued to use our voice and our mandate on the international stage, at the UN and at an EU level to call for a ceasefire now, and we have never wavered on that, and we will never waver on that. I think we can be very proud of our own country for being so strong, and for sometimes remarkably being in the minority, which I think many of us can't understand why other countries are finding it difficult to call it what it is, and to call out what Israel are doing in Palestine as simply wrong and murderous and barbaric. I am conscious that whilst we are debating a motion that is solely focused on Palestine, I do think it's always important to acknowledge what happened on October 7th, the barbarity of it, how wrong it was, that there are still innocent hostages, Israeli hostages being held by Hamas, that should also be released immediately. They are not bargaining chips. They are not to be used as a tool in a war between Hamas and the Israeli government. And I think that's important to say for those families that are still awaiting the return of their loved ones. I can only imagine the despair that they are feeling as well. But it is important, I think, to acknowledge that at the outset, when there were moves at an EU level to suspend aid to Palestine, Ireland stepped up and was one of 4 member states to stop that. We've continued to fund UNRWA when other countries decided not to do so. I believe that was the right thing to do. I understand the point being made that there were 12, 13 individuals accused of being involved in the October 7th attack, but the disproportionate response to suspend all funding to the detriment and to the severe impact it would have on people that are supported in Palestine by UNRWA is completely disproportionate and wrong. And I'm really glad and proud to see that my country and my government didn't do that and committed a further 20 million to UNRWA and have continued to support the really vital work that's happening on the ground there. We've also used our voice at the recent Munich Security Conference, again, to advocate for a ceasefire, the release of all hostages.
and we continue to do so at the EU Security Council. So I do believe that as a country and as a government, we are using our small voice as a small country, but one that I think is respected internationally in terms of our long and proud history of peacekeeping and a voice for peace internationally. We are respected in that regard, and I do think we're listened to. And we've continued to use our voice and will continue to use our voice to always advocate for peace, a two-state solution, an end to the conflict, and the protection of civilian lives. I think what we've witnessed, how this is continuing for so long, in this day and age, when we are literally watching firsthand almost what's happening on the ground in Gaza, it just beggars belief that this is being allowed to continue. And I think most of us, I think all of us can say we have no faith in Hamas to represent or look after the Palestinian people. I think that's accepted. They are a terrorist organisation. Israel seem to be on a path of revenge and completely blinded by revenge. And they will take a different view, and they will say that they have a right to protect their people, and of course they do. They have a right to defend themselves. But there comes a time when you cross that line, and I think they crossed that line a long time ago. And I understand the pain that they are also suffering. Well, I attempt to understand the pain they might be suffering when they await the return of those hostages that are still in captivity somewhere in Gaza. But I think we all continue to look to the US for leadership on this, because I think there is a belief internationally that it is probably the only country that has any real influence in Israel in really bringing a stop to this. And that is why it is so regrettable that the resolution at the UN Security Council was again vetoed. And I think that is something that will be marked in history. And I think that those that made that decision will have to live with that decision and the lives that have been lost since that decision was made. The amount of children that have been killed in the last number of months since October 7th is just unthinkable. But it's important that we talk about it. It's important that it's on the record, and it's important that it's called out. There is no excuse. There is no rationale for it. There is no defence of what is happening on the ground in Gaza. And then you have to ask the question, when the Israeli or the IDF, the Israeli government and the IDF give notice, if we can call it that, to people to move out of an area because we intend to bomb it, whether it's a hospital, it doesn't matter if you can't physically move or you're too sick or too small or too vulnerable. There are people now in Rafah that have been displaced 3 and 4 times. Where are they supposed to go? Where are they supposed to go? They're literally up against a fence. Egypt won't let them in. They say that Israel controls their borders. I don't buy that either, by the way. And Egypt will have to answer for what they are doing in not accepting people. It's so rare that you have a conflict zone where people literally cannot get out. There is nowhere to go. And you'd have to ask the question, why were people advised and told to move towards Rafah, as if you're funneling people into a small little area to make it so much easier to target and take them out? That's what it looks like. And I'm sure the IDF and the Israeli government will deny that. And all I'll say, and I see that I'm out of time, is that as a country we have to continue to advocate for peace and to push for a ceasefire now. But I believe war crimes have been committed. I think those responsible should be held to account.
Okay.
And I hope to see that happening as soon as is possible. And I say that whilst also accepting that there are processes to be followed. I understand all of that. And there are good reasons for having processes in place.
Okay.
But those that are responsible for murdering innocent civilians need to be brought to justice in the international courts.
Senator Garvey, 6 minutes.
Thanks, Oireachtas. Yeah, thanks. I want to thank in particular Senator Francis Black, because I suppose the first time I heard about Palestine was about 20 years ago, thanks to your work. Most people know you for your songs, but I knew you for your work on Palestine, so I want to thank you about that. I got involved in the Palestine support group fundraising many years ago, thanks to you. This did not start on the 7th of October, far from it. It's been going on for decades and decades. It's a very important motion. It is great to see the whole House supporting it. I think it's really good that we're unified on this. It's like you were saying, Senator Alice Mary, like, what can we do? And every week at our parliamentary party meeting, we're all racking our brains going, what else can we do? What else can we do? Because it's so hard to sit by and see what's happening on a daily basis. I think it's good that our Attorney General is going tomorrow to the International Court of Justice. This is going on since last July, but he will be heard tomorrow speaking on behalf of the Irish government, and that will be useful. You know, it's the same criminal justice court that South Africa are engaging in more recently. I think that's good that's happening. The court will hear over 50 countries over the course of the hearings, and it will hear Ireland's Attorney General Rossa Fanning tomorrow morning. It's something. I mean, you're clutching at straws here. I also have found it amazing to see all the ordinary people of Ireland fundraising and going out in protests. It's so moving to see people really taking action. And actually, we had a meeting with the General Commissioner Philippe Lazzarini of UNRWA last week. It was amazing, and he was explaining how the money is so useful. And I think it's brilliant that we put the 20 million in, because he said there's over 450 million on pause on funding from countries around Europe because of that stupid story that went out there. It hasn't even been proved right about people in UNICEF or in UNRWA. Out of 30,000 employees, apparently 12 were involved with Hamas somehow. But you just wonder, A, is it true? And even if it is, out of 30,000 people, is that a reason to pause funding for these poor people of Palestine? It's just insane. And like, it's really good that we decided to increase our funding, to send a message out to the other countries. For God's sake, forget about that story around 12 people out of 30,000. Give the money to these people, they need it. And that's why I think we have to admire the people of Ireland so much more for all the fundraising they're doing. Every penny is, you know, and it was funny because he was saying, the UNRWA guy was like, he was so happy the Irish government weren't talking about how many trucks are getting in, and, you know, because lots of countries are always asked about that. He said the main thing is that we're getting stuff in and we need more of it, but it is dire straits over there. And even he was saying the local police there were usually helping UNRWA workers get to outreach places, and now so many of them have been killed that they're stopping doing that as well. So it seems to be getting worse on a daily basis. One thing we did, myself and the other TDs and senators in our parliamentary party, we wrote a letter to every minister of the government that's going to any country over St. Patrick's weekend, and we've asked them to raise it as an issue with every leader of every country they're going to visit. So it's not just in America, it's, you know, with Leo Varadkar giving the Shamrock and all that, it's not just going to London. We have to talk to everybody about this. Also, I think it's really good that we called out Ursula von der Leyen, because she doesn't speak for us. And it's really ironic because she's German, and of course the Germans are selling weapons to Israel, which is just despicable. And I think that's something else we have to call out here as well. I mean, we only have one voice each, and we are small, but we're mighty as a country, and we always have been. And I'm calling Irish Americans to call out Joe Biden and call out the Americans as well. It's insane. I mean, Netanyahu is a complete psychopath. And he's not going to care. He even said it today. He doesn't care about the International Court of Justice. He doesn't care. Like, I think the only way we're going to get them is through really, really, really strong sanctions. And I think it's so important what we're doing with Spain and getting other countries to come on board as well. We have to get them. All they care about is money, obviously. And, you know, taking over the land, because it doesn't seem like there's any other issue here. Like, it's way beyond what happened on October the 7th, bad and all as that was. That seems almost irrelevant now in the scale of their retribution. Has so far removed from any kind of revenge that could be seen, or, you know, kind of equality of, like, we'll get you back, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It's way beyond that. And it is deeply worrying when you're somebody of that kind of mental instability, I suppose, just doing whatever he wants, and he doesn't seem to care. The whole world are crying out. I think it's still really important, and UNRWA said this as well, to see people take to the streets is really important. It was interesting, they said that we shouldn't dispel the Israeli ambassador, but it's really good that they can say that the Irish people are standing on the street saying, we want them, we want the ambassador gone, we don't want anything to do with Israel on any level. So, you know, I can see why we should hold on to the Israeli ambassador, but it's interesting that they think we should, but they also think it's really good that Irish people are calling for her removal. And I think that's very interesting, because you just don't know what the right thing to do is sometimes. I think that it's really important as well that people have some hope in us as a government, opposition and parties in government, that they don't kind of think that we don't care and that we could stop the war, but we just couldn't be bothered. Like, sometimes I get messages from people telling me about children dying and mothers dying as if I don't care. But I mean, we're all humans here. I mean, they need to know that we all care deeply. And as Senator Higgins said, we're all trying to rack our brains as to what more we can do as a small nation. I mean, as a small nation, we are punching above our weight. There's always more we can do, I think. I just think that we have to keep going, supporting this motion, supporting future things we can think of. I think the sanctions are a massive one. I think diplomatically is the only way. I do have serious concerns about that man's mental health. I don't know if it's that he's insane or that he's just so greedy and he thinks that he can actually wipe out an entire population of a country. But we know, as Irish people, that the only way to resolve anything, because we did it in the north, was through diplomatic means. And unfortunately, that Netanyahu will not meet Hamas. So we need to create some other kind of representation of the Palestinian people to go into negotiations with them. But I want to thank you for the motion, and in particular Senator Francis Black.
Okay, just to give a rundown, it's Fine Gael next, then Senator Boylan, Senators Flynn and Senator Gavin then. Sharing time, or do you want to go separately, or what's easier? Okay, well then Senator Doherty then, if that's all right, 6 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just first of all thank Francis and Alice Mary, not just for this particular motion and the opportunity to debate yesterday, but we've had multiple debates over the last number of years, and I think if I was to be asked by anybody on the road tomorrow, Francis, what's the most important issue to you, it's the thing I would associate the most with you, have raised so often in this House. And so your commitment to people, to human dignity, to social justice, and yours, Alice Mary, is absolutely unquestionable, and to just thank you for it. Chair, I've received hundreds of emails in the last couple of days, and I'm embarrassed to say that I haven't been able to respond to all of them, but I'm very pleased to be able to stand up here tonight and say that I support the Palestinian people. I have no notion as to what the Israeli people felt like after the 7th of October. I absolutely probably think they were enraged and suffering from shock and grief and horror and anger and everything. But what we've seen over the last number of months is a people that have absolutely been blinded by rage, because I can totally understand that a terrorist organisation that really had, were responsible for a shocking event on the 7th of October needed to have a response to it. But the tens of thousands of people, the 17,500 children that we see on the hour every single day, shaking on hospital trolleys, if they even are hospital trolleys because there's no hospitals left, is absolutely so. It's nearly so shocking that it's nearly not believable, except we know it absolutely is the truth. And you know the saying of that the first casualty of war is the truth. You can't lie with the pictures that we see. We can hear Israeli people, and stories on the internet that may or may not be true, but you absolutely cannot lie with the pictures that we see before our eyes. I saw a picture yesterday, an aerial picture of Gaza, and there doesn't seem to literally be anything left except rubble. And so when I hear colleagues talking earlier on about, mothers moving from one part of Rafah to another part and to another part, I don't know where they're moving to, because actually when I look at the pictures, there isn't anything left to move away from or to move to. And then you see on Israeli Twitter accounts pictures of beautiful, beachside resorts where apparently this is what it looked like a couple of weeks ago. And their, subterfuge or disinformation is to say, why would, the Palestinian people have let all of this go to ruin? The only people that's responsible for the destruction of that picture, if that was ever true in the first place, and I don't know whether it is or it isn't, are the people that are waging, the war on the innocent people. And I have no doubt that in tunnels somewhere, or maybe even the 12 people in UNRWA, there were people obviously that were intent on, retaliating or, attacking Israelis, but it's totally and wholly, completely disproportionate to the response that we've seen from Israel over the last number of months. And it's probably very difficult to understand as to you pointing out that the failure of international community to hold the Israelis to account. And when it boils down to it, I can only probably excuse politics in a certain way, because when you look at some of the large countries, and okay, there's probably a history with regard to some of our European countries with regard to their response and how they continue to support Israel, and there's probably guilt and history within their DNA, but there are so many countries that have absolutely nothing to do with memory or corporate DNA history, and they're still standing idly by and not making the charges against Israel. And when you hear Roisin talking about mad people and one particular man, I actually don't even blame him, because there's an entire government and a whole agency of operations, both real government and permanent government in Israel, that is doing nothing but supporting their actions. And it's really, really hard to understand. And so I have to be honest with you, that's why I'm so proud of the response, not just of the Irish people, because that's been immense and I think probably long-standing. There's always been a really good connection between the Irish people and the Palestinian people. Again, probably because of our shared history, right? But the response from our government and our officials over the last couple of months, probably a very lonely position that started by Liv Radker and Micheál Martin. It was a very isolated position, and I think people were very wary of, oh, what are they saying, and they're outliers. But I think I'm very, very proud of the position that our government has taken, and indeed our people has taken. And some of the language that's been used, albeit that it's an attempt to be diplomatic in what is absolutely an undiplomatic situation, started off probably a little bit softly. But words like revenge are really, really strong and powerful. And I think you've seen those diplomatic efforts have managed to bring other countries along. Not as many, obviously, as we'd like, but I think that move for momentum will change in the coming weeks and months. But obviously, ultimately, the person that needs to stand up, the strongest in the entire world, is the President of the United States. And he needs to be really, really strong in his language. And I know I heard last week that he said something on a phone call to the President of Israel. It's not good enough to say it on a phone call. It's really important that we hear it loud and clear. And also, you have to put your money where your mouth is. There's no point in telling them to stop doing something on the one hand and keep giving them the arms to do it on the other hand. We really either care about the destruction of a real whole entire race of people and we're going to do something about it, or everything else is just lip service. And so I want to just thank you for what you did today. I'm really, really pleased that this is going to pass unopposed this evening, because I think we all share the shock, the horror and the revulsion of what's going on, and we stand behind the people of Palestine. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Boylan.
I'd like to also echo the commendations for the Civic Engagement Group for bringing this motion to the Seanad tonight. You keep seeing day in, day out the horror that's unfolding in Gaza, and the one thing that you see Palestinians say is, don't stop talking about us, your voices, our lives depend on us. And I think I'm not the only one in saying that, the feeling of powerlessness and frustration and hopelessness at the failure of the international community to act is soul destroying, and that's why we have to keep talking and we have to keep having these motions. And it is important that we follow up those words with those who have the ability to do that with actions. Because it is right, Ireland has been strong in its language, but we do need to follow through with actions. Just earlier today, there were reports out of the Syrian capital, Damascus, that the Israeli army had conducted a precision strike on an apartment building and they assassinated 2 people on the 5th floor. And I suppose there's 2 things that come out of that. Is one, how brazen the Israeli government is about expanding this war into other territories. But it also highlights incredibly surgical nature of the strike, and how that puts into sharp relief just how barbaric the wanton destruction of Gaza really is. If you look at the attack on the Jabalia refugee camp, a supposed safe zone, there was no precision strikes there. They were treated to indiscriminate bombardment with 2,000-pound bombs. So we can be under no illusion at this stage. This is not a war of defence against Hamas. This is an effort to collectively punish the people of Gaza. It's the ethnic cleansing of the people of Gaza. It is a genocide. It is another Nakba. And some of these words, lose their potency of their original meaning through misuse. But I think in this case, they're not being misused in any shape or form. And, the motion itself lays it out very plainly and powerfully. The statistics of what we're all witnessing in real time, the 28,000 Palestinians that are killed, the children that are being slaughtered, the 17,000 who've been left without any surviving family. 1,000 children have had one or both legs amputated, many of them without any form of anaesthetic. 122 journalists murdered. 152 UN officials have been killed. 2.3 million people displaced. And aerial bombardment, again, witnessed with our own eyes, of the routes that are used by displaced people who are told to move because you would be safe if you moved. We've seen the targeting of civilian infrastructure, including hospitals. In fact, on the way home today, I heard on drive time them say that there's been no food delivered into northern Gaza in 3 weeks. There's no baby formula. Parents are resorting to feeding their children cat food for as long as that will last. So this is the reality that's happening, the deaths and the injuries and the systematic destruction of Gaza's society. It's not collateral damage. It's a genocidal rage that's being meted out on an innocent population. And while all of this slaughter is happening, the EU is dithering and is playing political games with the lives of the people of Palestine. And instead of spending serious time and effort calling for a ceasefire, we've seen the President of the European Commission give unconditional, unqualified support to Netanyahu's genocidal onslaught. She claimed she speaks for Europe, but she undermined efforts for a ceasefire. She could have saved countless lives in Gaza. Competency for foreign policy at a European level lies with the European Council, at which each member state has a veto. Von der Leyen has completely overstepped the mark and the power of her office. She has caused more division, I would say, than Brexit even has to the European so-called project, and she should not be given a second term in office. And I would urge my colleagues in the Green Party and Fianna Fáil to ensure that Ursula von der Leyen does not serve a second term at the European Commission. And I know I'm running out of time, but I do welcome the decision of the Taoiseach to call on the European Commission to urgently review the EU-Israel Association Agreement. But I would argue that, a real action would be triggering Article 82 and the immediate suspension, and allow that review to be conducted, but suspend the Association Agreement now while the review is being conducted. Because again, if you compare that to the actions around UNRWA, and the allegations that 12 UNRWA workers, and I think that was whittled down to 8 possibly workers, we've seen no evidence. Israel won't provide the evidence to anybody. But yes, there was no such call for a review of UNRWA funding by those European countries who stopped it. They just took a decision to stop funding. And I do welcome that Ireland wasn't one of those and has actually increased the funding to UNRWA. I think that was a really important gesture, and that's the type of actions that we need to see more from, because it is very clear there is a concerted effort to undermine, even abolish the lifeline that is funding UNRWA. And we know that the timing of it as well, when they came out with that, coalesced with the timing of the ICJ, and that's no coincidence either. So, as I said, it's beyond dispute now that Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza, and the Irish government does have an obligation to take further action. We need to set timeframes when we're going to recognise the state of Palestine. We need to enact the illegal Israeli settlements divestment bill and the occupied territories bill. We need to join the ICJ genocide case against Israel, employ sanctions, and use every single diplomatic tool that we have at our disposal, because it's simply not good enough to have strong words at this point.
Thanks. Senator Sherlock.
Laska Hirlock, and I want to very much thank, and thanks Minister for coming to the Chamber, and I want to very much thank the Civil Engagement Group for their very detailed motion this evening, to Senator Black for all her advocacy and for continually bringing the plight of Palestinians up in this House over many years now. And of course, as Senator Garvey said, this isn't just about October 7th and life after that. It's obviously over many years. And to Senator Higgins as well, in terms of her work. With almost 30,000 dead, another 70,000 plus missing or injured, 50,000 pregnant women with little or no health care. We've heard all those shocking stories of caesarean sections being carried out with no anaesthetic and no access to any dignity, let alone decent health care in giving birth, and thousands of children in starvation and malnourishment. To be honest, I'm not sure that words matter anymore. Since October 7th, we've all issued thousands of words appealing to the Israeli government, pleading with the Israeli government to immediately cease their war on the Palestinian people, their genocide on the Palestinian people. But they're not listening. The Israeli government hasn't been forced to listen. And instead, what we are seeing is an Israeli government that has become emboldened. The language of dehumanisation, of ethnic cleansing becoming commonplace in the Knesset. We see a conference on the victory of Israel, openly talking about the forced migration of Palestinians out of Gaza, about the effective annihilation of Gaza. We're seeing the disgusting disinformation where spokespersons talk about the threat of Hamas everywhere, which means that hospitals or schools, there is nowhere sacrosanct or sacred anymore. The shocking threats of the annihilation of Gaza, the calling 2 million Gazans in the West Bank, or the calling of 2 million Palestinians in the West Bank as Nazis, the description of them as Nazis. This Israeli government will stop at nothing. And, you know, we're even seeing the appalling exploitation of those who are currently facing housing shortages in Israel itself. We're seeing those persons who are victim to a housing crisis being lured into a situation where they're forced to become settlers themselves. And while we're glued to our screens and talking about Gaza, we know that in the West Bank, 300 Palestinians have been killed between October and December. The UN has talked about incidents of sexual violence by members of the Israeli Defence Forces on Palestinian women and children, and yet that doesn't get the coverage. So I suppose, to my mind, if words don't work anymore, then we need to send a signal to make Israel listen. We need to talk about sanctions, financial sanctions against any company who operates in the illegal settlements. So that doesn't just mean pulling the ISIF money out of the companies that are currently operating there. That means actually sanctioning, imposing financial and trade sanctions against these companies. We need financial sanctions, I believe, against Israeli ministers. So we've had the Minister of National Security, Ben-Gvir, talk about nuking Gaza, sending all Gazans to Ireland, resettling Gaza, and effectively cultivating and stirring up a hatred of Palestinians. We've had the Minister of Finance, Bezalel Smotrich, calling 2 million Palestinians in the West Bank Nazis. And there's no consequences for any of this. So I do believe that the Irish state needs to be brave and needs to impose sanctions not only on the illegal settlements, but on those ministers that effectively are perpetrating and propagating a war of genocide on the Palestinian people. And on the Israeli state itself, the Israeli state earns 20 billion euros from trade in goods and services from the European Union every year. Now, how can the European Union call itself a peace project and still continue to have a free trade agreement with a country that's currently committing genocide? So I absolutely support the many calls that have been made now for an immediate suspension of the Israel-EU free trade agreement. And I want to welcome the efforts by the Irish government to date, but, you know, we have to go further. We actually have to act unilaterally at this stage. Because there have been fundamental breaches in that trade agreement, in that association agreement, and I don't think we're going to achieve anything by waiting for a consensus at European Council level. I also want to commend the additional funding to UNRWA when other countries disgracefully turned their back on the organisations. But I suppose, to go back to my point, we have to do more than words at this stage. Words have failed. So we need to go and recognise the state of Palestine. We need to progress the Occupied Territories Bill. We need to unilaterally impose sanctions. And it's ironic in some ways that both the US and France have imposed sanctions on settlers, but we know that they're not of much use. But we can impose sanctions and send a message to the rest of the world that we're not content to keep up with this false pretense of saying one thing and yet continuing to trade elsewhere. So, Minister, I think the time for words are over. We need to do a lot more, and I want to thank my colleagues in CG for bringing forward this important motion this evening.
Just before, thanks Senator Sherlock, just before I call on Senator Ward, it's just to warmly welcome guests of Senator Horkin, the Estonian ambassador, and her husband, and indeed their guest, Etienne Capaci. You're very welcome into Shannon Éireann today, and this is a timely debate about Palestine put forward by the Civil Engagement Group, which is receiving cross-party support, so it's an important debate naturally. And thank you for coming here, and I hope you enjoy your rest of your visit with Senator Horkin. Senator Ward.
Can I start by acknowledging the importance of this motion and how comprehensive it is. It's not a short document, 5 pages in the order paper today, and so much in terms of suggestions for what we can actually do. This is a motion that I think is constructive and positive, and if ever the government were in any doubt about what avenues are open to it, I don't necessarily say that every one of them is, but I agree with this motion, and I think that the Civil Engagement Group, and Senator Black in particular, with whom I've spoken on this issue so many times, has identified in this motion a series of comprehensive actions that this state can and should take. Can I focus in particular on page 449 of the order paper in relation to the suggestion that we trigger Article 82 of the EU-Israel Association Agreement? That's a key aspect of this, I think. 25% of Israeli external trade is with the European Union. This is an area where we can make a very strong impact in Israel, and there has been lots of talk about the obligations on countries like America, who have unfortunately do not have a good track record in terms of being upfront with their allies in Israel in terms of their behaviour, their respect for the rule of law, and their respect for actually observing international legal principles. And all of that is true. But here's something that the European Union can actually do. There is a specific clause in that agreement that allows us to trigger the human rights breach that is undoubtedly and indisputably there. And there's no way that Israel can ignore that. If it's a quarter of their exports, it's going to have an impact, and they will have to sit up and listen. Unfortunately, we can't do that unilaterally. It is something that has to be done across the European Union. However much I might like us to be able to do that, I don't think we can. So I'm not sure about how reasonable it is to suggest that we should be doing it unilaterally, but we should certainly be working within the Council and at every level of government and diplomacy to convince those countries in Europe who might have historical justifications for what they're doing, but to convince those countries in Europe that they need to take action. And what happened on the 7th of October is unforgivable in terms of Hamas's actions. It was disgusting. It is something that we in a stable democracy like Ireland find difficult to comprehend, the level of terrorism that was meted out by Hamas against Israeli people. And I said in this chamber this week that Hamas has sacrificed its own citizens on the altar of its ambition in terms of its children, its families, its women, who are innocent civilians in the Gaza Strip who are now suffering the military onslaught from Israel. But what Hamas did in acting selfishly on that occasion, 7th of October, is they sparked an indescribable reaction from Israel. And I'm very proud of the Government of Ireland for having called them out and using the word revenge and vengeful in terms of the actions of the Israeli government. There is no doubt that it is disproportionate, illegal, genocidal, terroristic. It is appalling in every sense. It's totally disproportionate to what was done. But that has always been the way relations between Palestine and Israel have been. When an Israeli person, be it a soldier or an innocent civilian, is killed by a terrorist attack from one of the Palestinian organizations, the response from Israel has been tenfold. It has always been that way, and unfortunately, for many years, decades and generations, they have not been called out on it. The countries of the West, be it America or the European Union or any other country around the world, has not comprehensively called out Israel for its breaches of international law. References made to settlements, illegal settlements. There is not a single reputable international lawyer in the world who does not consider the behaviour of Israel in the West Bank and elsewhere in terms of claiming land that is not theirs as being absolutely illegal. And yet they have continued to be allowed to do it. And sanctions, yes, but sanctions haven't stopped them from doing it, haven't forced them to have those settlers leave. The only time we've had any kind of movement on that was in 2005 when there was disengagement from the Gaza Strip. But right across the West Bank, tracts of land that belong to Palestinians are being swallowed up by Israeli settlers with the support of the Israeli Defence Forces and protected by the Israeli Defence Forces. And I remember talking to a particular settler who had set up a vineyard, and he claimed, for example, that Palestinians had been living there for hundreds of years and they could never grow anything. Yet when he came along, God provided, and he could spring up vines and produce wine because that was God's will. He didn't mention the millions of euro of irrigation equipment that came with his farm to grow those vines. But that is the selective approach of Israeli settlers and of the Israeli government now in terms of how they approach these things. But let's send out a message to Israel. You're not fooling anyone. You're breaking the law all of the time. It has now come to a situation where you are not just breaking the law in terms of gathering land. You are now slaughtering innocents. Innocents Children, innocent people who have nothing to do with your conflict and your persecution complex, which may well be justified in a historical context, but can never justify what is happening in Gaza today, can never justify the death toll, can never justify the murder, and that's what it is. It's murders of innocent people who have nothing to do with your conflict. And you're wading in there with your machine of war, and whether it is today or tomorrow or in a year's time, there will be consequences for Israel. There has to be. Whether it's at the International Court of Justice or in the International Criminal Court. And Israel is not immune from that. They may not be signatories to the Rome Statute, they may not be part of the International Criminal Court, but there has already been a ruling that the jurisdiction extends to what happens in the Gaza Strip. So there will be answers for those military figures, those politicians who have provided for this onslaught against innocent civilians. It is genocide, it is a crime against humanity, it is murder. And none of these crimes can go unpunished. And let's send that message out to Israel now. You will not get away with it, you're fooling no one, and the consequences are coming.
Senator Eileen Flynn.
Thank you, Laska Herlock. Over the last few weeks, I've been questioning, like, where is humanity in the world? You know, we have over 28,000 Palestine people has been killed in Gaza in recent weeks. 11,000 of those, over 11,500 of those have been children. Over 17,000 Palestinian children are left by themselves. Every single night when I'm at home with my two little girls and hugging them and putting them into bed, I think more so from the 7th of October of mothers in Gaza, in Palestine, who is tucking their children into bed at night, trying to comfort their children. You know, we have to bring this back to the human life, to what's going on right in front of our eyes, to this genocide really that we are experiencing. And you know, it's very, very tough, the images that we've been seeing lately. You know, UNICEF's officials speak of 11-year-old young girl who was with her family in her uncle's house, and it was bombed, where she lost her mother, her father, her brother, her two sisters, and were killed. And she was left very injured from that incident and had to get her leg amputated. You know, this is an 11-year-old child who is now living in Rafah, which will be Israel's next target. You know, Minister, my question today is, if there were more than 28,000 Europeans were killed in recent weeks, if there were over 11,000 European children killed in recent weeks, would the global response be so slow? You know, would it be so slow? And I think we all know the answer to that question. You know, as been said by colleagues here in the House, you know, I haven't got the words, and I think it's like we have to move beyond words. It's a step in the right direction, supporting Senator Francis Black and the civil engagements motion here this evening. I would like to thank Senator Black. In her last term in this Senate, Senator Black also worked very, very hard for people in Palestine as well. Until Palestinian people are free, none of us are free, really. So I'm going to end, and I'm not going to use up the full 6 minutes. I'm just going to end my speech from a Palestinian poet and professor, Dr. Rafat, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike in December. Okay, if I must die, you must live, to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings. Make it white with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze, and bid no farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself. Sees the kite, my kite you made, flying up above, and think for a moment, an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope, let it be a tale. That's from, as I said, Dr. Rafet, who was killed in December. Let all of over the 30,000 people who's been killed in Gaza, let them die for something, for changing the world and making it a better place. So again, Minister, thank you for supporting, and the cross-party support her this evening. Thank you.
Paul Gavin. Look, it's good to have you in the chair. I know it's an issue that's been close to your own heart in the past. I want to welcome the Minister. I want to particularly congratulate the CEG group just for their passion and such a comprehensive motion that really is a roadmap, Minister. It's a roadmap in terms of what can be done, what should be done, what must be done. And look, I want to commend all of the speakers so far this evening. I think it's great that we can send a unified message on this issue to your government, Minister. And that's what you're getting here this evening. I think it's very important. The difficulty is you run out of words to describe what we're seeing here. I mean, the statistics are awful. 28,000 Palestinian civilians at least murdered, including 70% women and children. But of course, the statistics don't really do it. And I'm just thinking of the images I've seen in the last couple of days, and I just want to bring three to your attention. The first is of that young married couple. They were married in the rubble about a week ago. And then they were blown up and murdered 3 days after their wedding. And then there's the images of Palestinians trying to get relief from food trucks and being gunned down by the IDF, literally murdered. And then there's the video that the IDF made afterwards, because we know people are starving in Gaza. So the IDF troops made a video of themselves enjoying a feast and showing off all the food they had to the Palestinians who they're currently starving to death. It's beyond horror. I've never seen anything like it in my lifetime. Of course we need a ceasefire, and there's a unified call from here this evening, an immediate ceasefire. And the two main obstacles to that, firstly, of course, the far-right, disgusting apartheid government in Israel itself. But equally, we must be very clear, and it's been made clear by others, the US's responsibility in this regard. They voted against a call for an immediate ceasefire again yesterday for the third time. And it begs the question, have they not seen enough people die yet? What will it take for them to do the right thing? And I think any of us and any of our parties going to travel to the US next month have to make that abundantly clear in the starkest terms. This is something fundamentally wrong, something that must change, and we must make that call as clearly and strongly as we can. The next issue I want to talk about is my experience in Europe in relation to this issue, because I'm lucky enough to be a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and I watched firsthand as a really strong call for immediate ceasefire was undermined. And what we saw, and I'm just being honest with you here, I don't want to divide the House in any way, was members of the Renew group, ALDE group, almost all members of the EPP, allying with the far right in that assembly, in Europe's Human Rights Assembly, to undermine that call for a ceasefire. I also want to make it clear the Irish delegation did not take part in that. But it was an absolutely shameful thing to see. Others have mentioned Ursula von der Leyen. Let's be clear on this. She gave cover for the genocide that's happening here. She gave unqualified support to Netanyahu to carry out what he's doing at a pivotal time when they were escalating that action. And again, I make no apologies for this. I want to call on the Fine Gael MEPs who are currently endorsing von der Leyen for a second term to change their mind. How on earth can you endorse someone who gave a cover for genocide? And I want to call on anyone interested in running for Europe and our existing MEPs to be very clear on that. There should be no equivocation in relation to her disgraceful role in what's happened. And then above all, Minister, I want to echo Senator Higgins's call for your government to be brave. I want to commend the actions you have taken, particularly support for UNRWA and the very clear words that we've heard. But I think the amount of people who are tuning in tonight want to hear a message that we will go beyond words, that we will take actions. And those actions include passing the Occupied Territories Bill, passing the Divestments Bill. I expect that bill will be back in the Dáil either next week or the week after, Minister. And there will be no room for equivocation. Your government must support that bill. You must support that bill because it's within our power to do so. You'll also see many references in this excellent motion to the word apartheid. And I want to invite you, Minister, on your response this evening to ensure that your government comes off the fence when it comes to this term of apartheid. It doesn't matter whether I think Israel is an apartheid state. It does matter that Amnesty International says it's an apartheid state. Human Rights Watch says it's an apartheid state. The UN Special Rapporteur recognises it's an apartheid state. Over 450 separate NGOs recognise that Israel is an apartheid state. Minister, in your response, please do not duck this issue. Acknowledge that Israel is an apartheid state, like all of those human rights bodies. It's important. Language matters. We need to hear that from you this evening, Minister. And we need to see the actions we can take taken, because what people want to see is leadership. Unfortunately, we won't see it at EU level. And that means we need a coalition of the willing. We need to see these actions taken, Minister. I want to hear you say that you'll do so. It was in Fianna Fáil's manifesto and the Green Party's manifesto to endorse the Occupied Territories Bill. Surely Fine Gael are no longer opposing to that point of view. Let's see action. The people of Ireland expect action. And my last point is this. I cannot help but see the contrast between the treatment meted out to Russia, correctly in terms of their illegal invasion of Ukraine, and the 13 rounds of sanctions against them, and the summoning of their ambassador. Why haven't we summoned the Israeli ambassador? How many more people have to die before your government do that? I believe she should be expelled. But if you don't agree with that, at least for God's sake, summons her. If you did it to the Russian ambassador yesterday, why have you waited this long to do it in relation to the Israeli ambassador? I've taken too much time, and Gaeilge, I appreciate that. I do want to acknowledge that we all agree on so much this evening. But the people watching in tonight want to see action from this government, and this motion sets out those actions. Please, Minister, ensure those actions are taken, followed up. We need to do better.
First of all, I want to thank Senators Francis Black, Lynn Rowan, Eileen Flynn and Mary Higgins for bringing forward this motion here today. And I think it should be generally understood by now, and I want to confirm that the government is not opposing the motion. And it's a very extensive motion that condemns a number of actions. It notes with grave concern a number of other issues, further regrets several other items, and further notes a number of points put forward by the senators, and calls on the government to take specific action, and calls on the Council of European Union also to take certain actions. And we are taking action by supporting that call that has been put forward here, and the government is not opposing the motion here tonight. And I think it's important on such an important issue that the House can speak with one voice, as we are doing here now this evening. Our debate this evening coincides with the deepening concerns at the situation in Gaza and the intensifying international efforts. As the government set out in the House yesterday, Ireland is at the heart of these efforts. Both the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach have undertaken extensive engagement at EU and international level over the past weeks, and this will continue. Tomorrow, our Attorney General will present Ireland's analysis of Israel's occupation of Palestine to the International Court of Justice. I continue to work closely with my EU and international counterparts to press for increased humanitarian and development assistance, and I am proud of the leadership role that Ireland is playing in that regard. I will focus first on the current situation on the ground and engagement at international level. It was clear from our debate yesterday in this House that the House shares the deep sense of shock and despair at what has taken place in Israel and in Gaza since the 7th of October. The government has consistently and unequivocally condemned the attacks launched by Hamas on and since the 7th of October. We have underlined and will continue to underline that the rape and murder of civilians, destruction of civilian property, taking of hostages, use of human shields and firing of indiscriminate rockets at urban centres are serious violations of international humanitarian law. We have called and continue to call for all hostages to be released. However, we have been equally clear that international law limits the use of force in self-defence to more than is necessary and proportionate. Ireland's view is that these limits are being exceeded. The number of deaths reported is now approximately 30,000 people. This is a shocking reality. Reports and statistics are presented to us on a daily basis, which must also serve to underline the urgency of international action. Yesterday, the World Health Organization characterised the destruction around Nasser Hospital as indescribable. Last week, the UN Population Fund emphasised the particular vulnerabilities facing women. Everyone in Gaza is hungry, including 50,000 pregnant women with malnutrition, making them more susceptible to disease and less able to recover, and obviously leading to an increase in the number of miscarriages. The catastrophic humanitarian situation and damage to infrastructure will also leave lasting scars, especially for children. The UN report that more than 625,000 students and nearly 23,000 teachers in the Gaza Strip have been affected by school closures and attacks on education, including universities, leaving them with no access to education or safe places. Some 80% of school buildings in Gaza have sustained damage, including 142 schools that sustained major damage or were destroyed. Against this backdrop, the government continues to use all relevant possibilities and engagements to urge international progress at the highest political level towards an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of hostages, the protection of civilians and significant scaling up of full, safe, unhindered humanitarian access to all the people of Gaza. Following discussion at the Foreign Affairs Council, 26 EU member states agreed a statement urging Israel not to proceed with an offensive in Rafah and to abide the ICJ provisional measures, which are binding, and calling for an immediate humanitarian pause leading to a sustainable ceasefire. However, it remains vital that the international community as a whole unites around the need for immediate ceasefire, including the UN Security Council. It is deeply regretting that the US chose to veto a resolution at the Council this week which called for exactly that. This only deepens our conviction that the veto is an anachronism and has no place in the 21st century. These issues were central to the engagement of both the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach at the Munich Security Council conference last weekend, and was forcibly reiterated by the Taoiseach to his EU counterparts on Monday of this week. There are priorities that I've also underlined in my engagement with EU development ministers. Ireland, as I have stated, is central, has a central message in that all engagement at all levels, and our message is that there needs to be a dramatic upscaling of the level of humanitarian aid reaching the people of Gaza. It is both regrettable and irresponsible that the future of one of the key agencies in delivering such assistance is being put to severe risk at this time, the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine, UNRWA. I welcome Commissioner General Lazzarini was afforded the opportunity to address the EU development ministers, which I was pleased to attend earlier this month. He underlined that UNRWA is the backbone of humanitarian response and a lifeline for millions of refugees across the region. It is my belief that this message was heard clearly by my EU counterparts, and as was my own call upon those who have suspended funding to urgently rescind their decisions, including the European Commission itself. It was absolutely clear that the allegations made against 12 UNRWA staff are extremely serious. These staff had their contracts terminated, and an immediate investigation by the UN Office of Internal Oversight Services was announced. That investigation must be completed and be comprehensive, and should be done so as soon as possible, and I urge Israel to cooperate fully with that investigation. And at the meeting I was asked last week, it was indicated that the hope that this could be done by the 20th of April. I also welcome that the UN Secretary General has announced the appointment of an independent review group led by former French Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna, which will assess more broadly how UNRWA is ensuring neutrality and responding to any allegations of serious breaches that may arise. However, it is equally clear that an organisation that employs 13,000 people in the Gaza Strip alone, and that enjoys a robust mandate from the United Nations Assembly, cannot and should not be impugned on the alleged conduct of 12 individuals. Even more vitally, UNRWA provides a lifeline to 1.9 million people displaced by Israel's military operations. There is no replacement for UNRWA's work in Gaza, and I think everybody accepts that the work they do is irreplaceable, and there's no amount of NGOs has the infrastructure to carry out what would be needed. So we want to ensure that UNRWA can continue its work. That is why Ireland has demonstrated clear leadership through its allocation of a further €20 million to UNRWA last week. This additional allocation supplements our ongoing, long-standing financial commitment to UNRWA, which amounted to €18 million in 2023. An overall commitment to the Palestinian people in 2023 was €36 million, of which €20 million was provided in response to the conflict in Gaza. An airlift of 50 tonnes of Irish humanitarian supplies, including tents, took place on December the 15th last. These were also distributed in Gaza in January through Ireland's Rapid Response Initiative. In addition to direct support, Ireland also provided globally pre-position funds to the UN Central Emergency Response Fund to support Gaza's response in 2023. Ireland is the 10th largest contributor to this fund, which has allocated €15 million to the Gaza Strip by December. I also can assure the House that Ireland's efforts are also focused on the situation in the West Bank, where UN reports 393 Palestinians have been killed, including 100 children since the 7th of October. The UN has also reported that since the 7th of October, settlers with the political backing of key ministries are taking advantage of generally permissive environment to accelerate displacement of Palestinians from their land, raising concerns of forcible transfer, seeking to create facts on the ground, making the existence of a viable Palestinian state almost impossible to sustain. That is why Ireland has strongly supported proposals from the EU sanctions to be adopted against violent settlers in the West Bank who are attacking and displacing Palestinian communities. As the Foreign Affairs Council on Monday, it was clear that 26 member states are ready to move ahead with this. The US, the UK and France have already agreed to do so. It is not possible to achieve a consensus over the coming months, and that is regrettable, and that may be the case. Ireland will move ahead in conjunction with other EU partners to implement such measures at national level. There are provisions in national legislation to exclude people from entering the state, and officials in the Department and in the Department of Justice are examining options for such measures. Ireland continues to consistently raise these issues with the Israeli authorities, including in partnership with our partners on the ground. We also continue our financial support for civil society organisations working in the field of human rights and accountability, as well as the West Bank Protection Consortium, the work of which includes supporting vulnerable Palestinians in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, from individual and mass forcible transfer through the provision of material and humanitarian assistance and legal aid. Furthermore, the position of Ireland and the international community on the matter of Israeli settlements remains crystal clear. They are illegal under international law. This week, the International Court of Justice in The Hague is holding public hearings in an advisory proceeding on Israel's occupation of Palestine. I welcome that Ireland's Attorney General will appear before the court in The Hague tomorrow, where he will set out in detail Ireland's legal analysis of Israel's occupation of Palestine. The government is also continuing its analysis of the legal and policy aspects of South Africa's case under the Genocide Convention and is in ongoing contact with South Africa and other like-minded partners. We will take a decision on intervention once we have completed this comprehensive legal and policy analysis, and as the Taoiseach has set out, it is likely that we will make a final decision on the matter once South Africa files its written memorial. In November 2023, the government announced that it would make a voluntary contribution of $3 million to the International Criminal Court. This announcement was made shortly after the ICC prosecutor highlighted the urgent resource needs of his office during his visit to Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza. It was in addition to our annual contribution of $1.4 million in 2023, and it's because of these contribution, the International Criminal Court is in a position to carry out the work and take on the extra work that people have been calling for. And our best assistance that we have provided today is providing them the funds to enable them to do that, because they would not be able to do these work and carry out these investigations without appropriate funds. These actions reflect the centrality of the international law to the policies we adapt, both domestically and in the international sphere. Further, the government has been clear that unilateral initiatives that run contrary to legal advice, such as the Occupied Territories Bill, would not be compatible with EU law and would not be implementable in that situation. And this would undermine our broader promotion of compliance with international law and the UN and other international organisations. So we want to work collectively in the broader promotion of international law, and any law that's not implementable or compatible with EU law would be a contradiction of this. The government's approach is to engage in meaningful initiatives that influence the situation on the ground and that seek to shape the political and legal landscape underpinning the international policy and action. That is why the Attorney General is presenting our detailed case tomorrow at the International Court of Justice. That is why the Taoiseach has requested that the European Commission undertake a review of Israel's compliance with the human rights provisions of the Association Agreement. That is why Ireland is working with the EU partners to adopt sanctions against violent settlers in the West Bank who are attacking and displacing Palestinian communities. That is why Ireland has led by example by increasing its funding to UNRWA and has called on our partners to follow suit. And that is why humanitarian assistance, as well as long-term development support to the Palestinian people, remains a central priority for me as Development Minister. And that is why the government will continue its extensive engagement and diplomatic outreach to secure an immediate ceasefire and to restore a pathway towards a sustainable peace based on a two-state solution. This approach has been set out in several motions adopted by the Dáil since the onset of the crisis, and this is the approach the government will continue to pursue. Thank you.
Guramagat, Inish, Senator Francis Black.
Guramagat, Laska Hirlach, and let me start by saying thank you, Minister, and to the government for not opposing this motion. It's not often we're unified on something here in the chamber, and I have to say I'm just blown away by the fact that it's on Palestine that we are unified. I actually feel quite emotional, so bear with me. You know, I've been very passionate, and as my colleagues in the Civil Engagement Group have been, on Palestine for many years. And as I was sitting listening tonight, I think back when I visited Gaza back in 2018 and the amazing people I met there and the spirit of the people and help me. And I don't know if they're dead, I don't know if they're alive. I remember one woman saying to me, when I was in Gaza back then, she said that she was from a human rights organisation, a wonderful women's group. And she said, why have the international community abandoned us? And those words stay with me every time I look at social media, every time I see what the Israelis are doing. Why have the international community abandoned the people of Gaza and allowed them to be murdered on an hourly basis, and their children, to see those children, it's just horrific. And I'm so happy that we can be unified on this issue. You've no idea what it'll mean to the people of Palestine, what it'll mean to the people of Gaza. It may not mean much to people, because it's a Shannon motion, but this message that gets sent out now to the people of Palestine and to the people of Gaza is just a little ray of hope that Ireland cares, that the Irish government cares, that the Irish people care. And that's unbelievable. That's just beyond, I can't even explain what that means to them. So I just wanted to say that. I have to just bring it, just with regard to the Occupied Territories Bill, I have to highlight that, Minister, I have to disagree with the Attorney General's advice. We saw it. And we saw that, and we let many eminent lawyers across Europe, EU lawyers who saw that, and they said that it is compatible with EU law. So I just have to push back on that a little bit. And I'd love if this Attorney General would show us his advice. That's what I would like to see. I'd like to see if we could see that. I also want to, I suppose, highlight the one thing about when Irish representatives go abroad, I think that's really important on St. Patrick's Day, especially to the US. I think it's so important to send a message that the recognition of Palestine is key to future peace and the two-state solution. But it's also so important to push for permanent ceasefire, and a permanent ceasefire now. I would really hope that they will do that. I want to thank the officials from the department for the work that you're doing on Palestine, and I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. You are doing phenomenal work. I can't imagine what it's like for you on a daily basis to be looking at the horrors that's going on over there. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. Before I finish, I just want to, again, I wanted to say about, and I wanted to just highlight this piece because I left it out of my speech, and I'll try and be as quick as I can. In 1948, Minister Zionist militias ethnically cleansed 750,000 people from 522 villages in what is now Israel. And they did this by massacring nearly the entire population of villages like Deir Yassin near Jerusalem and Tantura near Haifa, and using the ensuing panic to incite Palestinians to flee across the border. Most Palestinians expected to return in a few weeks and this is what breaks my heart, they kept their house keys to prove their ownership. They were never allowed to return. Imagine if that was in Ireland. Could you imagine if that was down where you're from in Laois? You were told to get out of your home. If it was in Mayo, told leave your home and you will be able to return, but you were never able to return to your home. I mean, it's awful. Most of the people driven out in 1948 died in refugee camps or were scattered to the four corners of the world. Palestinians call this period the Nakba, which means the catastrophe, and 80% of the population of Gaza are descendants of those 1948 refugees. And now Israel wants to remove them from historic Palestine permanently. So it truly is an atrocity. And I would hope this motion sends a signal to the people of Palestine of hope. But I would love if we could bring this motion into the Dáil as well, Minister, and we could get that cross-party support. And again, I just want to finish by saying I want to thank you, I want to thank the government for supporting this motion. It really, really means so much to us, and it makes me a proud, very proud Irish woman standing here today to be living here in this country. And hopefully we'll be able to do more. And it's now about getting into action on this motion and to doing all the things that that's in this motion now. Let's get action and let's get working on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I think we can all agree that the need for an immediate and sustainable ceasefire and the unconditional release of all hostages is paramount, and the unhindered access of humanitarian aid is also vital for all those who are now suffering in Gaza. And while every country has the right to defend itself, it must do so within international law and humanitarian law. And the statement recently by the 26 EU members, I think, is to be welcomed. It's unfortunate it wasn't 27, but I think we are aware of what needs to happen. What happened on the 7th of October has been condemned consistently by everybody in this House and in the other House, and should never be allowed to happen again. But what is now happening is not going to bring the peace that everybody knows is required, so that future generations don't continue to live the mistakes of previous generations.